This is the Royal International Air Tattoo at Fairford in Gloucestershire. It's the biggest military air show in the world. And every year, something like 150,000 people come to enjoy 8 hours of non-stop flying display and an enormous static aircraft park, as well as a myriad other entertainments. The whole thing's run for the benefit of the charity for Air Force people and their families, the Royal Air Force Benevolent Fund. Royal IATs always include themed parts in their 8-hour flying displays. This year, the major theme celebrated the 80th anniversary of the founding of the Royal Air Force. So the last 2.5 hours of the flying display were devoted to an 80th birthday party. We'll be dropping in on that segment of the show several times. Other themes included Skywatch, all about airborne surveillance and reconnaissance, and the 50th anniversary of the biggest air supply operation there's ever been, the Berlin Airlift. The world's first independent air force was formed from the amalgamation of the Army's Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service on April 1st, 1918. The First World War still had a few months to run, so the new service was blooded in combat right from the start. Between the World Wars, when disarmament and appeasement were the order of the day, the junior service came quite close to being disbanded, but it more than fulfilled its promise during the Second World War, in the process becoming one of the world's greatest armed services. The celebrations started with what else? A fanfare, as Royal Air Force ensigns were flown past by a Puma and a Sea King helicopter. "80 specially invited guests were there to represent the 80 years. They ranged in age from 19 to 98. And reflecting the golden aviation days of the 1930s, the magnificent men of the Olympus Diamond 9 team of privately owned Tiger Moth trainers flew their delicate 9-ship formation. But back to the beginning, and a replica of perhaps the RAF's best fighter in the First World War, the SE-5A, leading a formation representing the new Air Force's first 15 to 20 years. The formation includes this rare Avro Tutor, and also a Curtiss JN-4 Jenny.
I joined the Royal Naval Air Service in 1917. I had a preliminary training at the Royal Naval College, Greenwich, where I was taught navigation and theory of flight and armament, and then I was sent out to the Royal Naval Flying School in France, in Vendôme, Loire-et-Cher, near Loire Valley, and there I learned to fly on a Caudron G3, having flown so many hours on that, cruising over the beautiful French countryside. I went to the other side of the airfield where I learned to fly this aeroplane behind me, a Curtiss J4. It was a totally different aircraft than the one I had flown before. It was bigger and it was heavier, and it had a more powerful engine, consequently. The controls were different, so it was merely giving me a further training on different types of aircraft and control. I was in France because on the 1st of April 1918 was the nominated date for the amalgamation of the two air forces, which were the Royal Naval Air Service and the Royal Flying Corps. They had both grown tremendously, and it was realized that now we had another element in which to combat, that is the air. So they brought the two together with the reason, naturally, that competition should be eliminated and that the use of the air and aircraft and the tactics connected therewith should be regularized.
Of course, one of the things about any good birthday party is getting together with old friends. The air forces of old allies are always ready to appear at the Royal International Air Tattoo, but doubly so when there's a celebration for the oldest independent air force in the world. So the younger, stripling some might say, the younger United States Air Force, as ever, is well represented. We celebrated their 50th birthday at the 1997 tattoo. RAF Fairford is of course a United States base, so there is a significant connection even without the flying. And in the flying display, old and newish from the US Strategic Bomber Force. First, the venerable B-52, still current of course. In fact, the Buffy was dreamt up in the 1940s, but it looks like soldiering on until the year 2030. This one's actually serving with the 93rd Bomb Squadron of the Air Force Reserve, and it's come from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. The aircraft commander, Major Mike Harvey, has a day job. He's a 737 pilot for UPS, and one of his crew, Joe Jones, is a medical student. Another part-time bomber crew flying the B-1B Lancer, and this is an aircraft that dates back a mere 23 years to the mid-70s. Anyway, these folks fly for the Kansas Air National Guard out of McConnell Air Force Base in Wichita. Their unit is the 127th Bomb Squadron. It's interesting, though, that these reserve and guard crews do everything the full-time Air Force crews do, except that they don't have anything to do with nuclear weapons. This old friend is Belgian, from the 31st Smaaldale, that's squadron in Flemish, and the 31st is based at Kleine Brogel. They're a NATO Tiger squadron, and this has got to be one of the best Tiger paint jobs I've ever seen. Apparently it took nearly a month to do. The aircraft is of course the Lockheed General Dynamics F-16, and this is the A model. But it's interesting because it wasn't entirely built by F-16 designers General Dynamics. It was assembled under license by Belgium and Holland for the air forces of those countries, as well as Denmark and Norway. Good view of the droops on the front edge of the wing, so-called high lift devices that help the F-16 in this very steep attitude for its very slow fly past at about 120 knots or 138 miles an hour. But the real secret is the fly-by-wire computer-driven control system. It's that allows the F-16 to fly right on the edge of its flight envelope and not stall and fall out of the sky. Now our old friends the French, with their pair of Mirage F1s that fly together as if they were welded. They call themselves Voltige Victor, meaning Victor Aerobatics. These two were definitely victorious because their virtuosity won them the Sir Douglas Bader Trophy for the best flying display in the whole show. They're quite long in the tooth, these two aircraft, from the 3e Escadron de Chasse of the 33e Escadrille at Reims in northern France. That's the 3rd Fighter Squadron of the 33rd Wing to you and me, or as they rather prosaically put it nowadays, 03.033. But anyway, the Mirage F1's been around in one form or another for the past 30 plus years. Dassault brought it out as what some people thought was a bit of a backward step after the delta-winged Mirage 3s. And no, I don't understand French numbering systems either. But the reason was that with their wide, high-efficiency swept wings and tailplanes, the manoeuvrability of the F1s was a whole order better than the early Mirage Deltas. Whatever, it was a great success. The F1 sold to at least 11 other countries outside France. The pilots who do this amazing glued-together act are both instructors at Reims. Captain Frédéric Pontaillet is the leader, and it's his first year in the job. And Lieutenant Jean Berlinson is the one in the number 2 aircraft. It's he who has to maintain that startlingly close formation on his leader. But oldish though these Mirages are, the French also bought their much newer Mirage 2000, which has won many trophies of its own in the past. And look, Serge Dassault has gone back to the tailless Delta after his foray into separate wing and tailplane. But the difference now is that the Mirage 2000 has more of that computer-controlled fly-by-wire magic that we've seen in the F-16. Once again, we get the benefit of display smoke, in this case from smoke generators attached to the rails that normally carry short-range air-to-air missiles. Those generators are usually referred to as smoke winders, after the Sidewinder missile, but in this case the French missile that goes on those rails is called Magic, and that seems to go pretty well with the performance of the 2000. And the smoke streaming upwards from the trailing edge of the wing demonstrates just how hard that turn is. The pilot, Captain Frédéric Lenglet, probably pulling 7G. His body weight has effectively gone up 7 times. Pilot and aircraft from the 2nd Squadron of the 5th Wing, 02.005, based at Orange in the south of France. Poor chap. Although during his 15-year flying career, Capitaine Lenglet has flown in plenty of hot war situations, over Iraq in Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and over the former Yugoslavia in what the French called Operation Salamandre. He's also displayed his impressive beast at the big air shows in Dubai, in Singapore and Chile. On Saturday, the French also delighted us with their prestigious national display team, the 8 Alpha Jets of La Patrie de France, with their unique blend of Gallic flair and skillful formation aerobatics. Here, our in-cockpit camera catches the professional cool of the team leader, Commandant Philippe Morales. Bravo! The International Air Tattoo received its royal tag in 1997 in recognition of its continuing royal support. 1998 was no exception, with His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, attending on the Sunday, and His Royal Highness Prince Faisal of Jordan was there all weekend. The Duke was particularly interested to meet the crew of one of the stars of the static display, the Tupolev Tu-22M Backfire, brought to the show for its debut appearance in Britain by the Ukrainian Air Force. More on that later, but it's true to say that only a show as big as the Royal IAT can attract such rarities.
This is a really enormous air show. In fact, it's the biggest military air display in the world. And this weekend there are 4,500 plus volunteers helping to get it all together. And they're all out here somewhere on the airfield working away. And the cycle to get this thing together really takes a whole year these days. But what goes on around us now, this activity that's everywhere, turning an empty airfield into the busiest one in the country, takes about 3 or 4 weeks, and all the tents sprout up and all the aircraft arrive in the last 3 days. It's a really, really busy period for us and for all those who are involved in it. But it's very much in a charitable cause. We're here to raise money for the Royal Air Force Benevolent Fund. Last year we raised nearly £500,000. We're hoping, of course, to do better than that this year. But as well as that, it's a spectacular family day out. And the weather's been wonderfully kind to us this year. The sun is shining. Everybody's here with their families enjoying themselves. So we've had both spectacle and fundraising. So all in all, a wonderful occasion.
The efforts of all those volunteers brought 150,000 spectators to the show over what turned out to be the first rain-free weekend in weeks. The perennial problems of getting the thousands of cars into and out of an airfield set amongst country roads on the borders of Gloucestershire and Wiltshire remained more or less intractable. But the delays were not as great as they had sometimes been in the past, thanks to careful planning by the combined strength of the tattoo staff and the 2 local police forces. But once you managed to get into the showground, there were all sorts of roving entertainers: jazz bands, clowns, a police band, jugglers, folk singers, robots, mime artists, plus lots of balloons of all shapes and sizes.
Tailplane. Fortunately, the bomber was able to land safely, and the 2 Harvard pilots fell down and landed on a nearby golf course.
And then the static display is one of the biggest anywhere. It's about 2 miles long, and it includes 207 aircraft from 25 nations. And on top of that, there are the 129 odd aeroplanes for the flying display on the other side of the airfield, away from the public areas. But even that doesn't include the 60-ish aircraft that flew in the display but didn't land at Fairford. Altogether, including the visiting and charter aircraft, there are about 420 aircraft involved, more than the total strength of many national air forces. And this was the moment that many of the spotters had been waiting for, when that Ukrainian Tu-22 Backfire arrived on the Wednesday before the show.
It can perform tasks on the operational fields with maximum long range is 6,800 kilometers, ceiling 20 kilometers, maximum speed 2,300 kilometers, maximum payload is 24 tons bombs. One of versions 69 bombs, 250 kilograms each. Or another version, 3 long-range rockets, 5,700 kilograms each. They attached one of them under fuselage and two under wings. I think that our flight from Ukraine in United Kingdom, this is a symbol of new relations between our people, between our countries. I am enjoy to have staying in United Kingdom at this very important event for other pilot, your air tattoo show.
And another treat for the spotters as the backfire departed on the Tuesday after the show. Harking back to the problems of traffic jams, a new idea this year was to have 2 and a bit hours of free promenade concert from the band of the Royal Air Force College as soon as the flying display finished. Part of the thought behind it was to try and reduce the numbers of people leaving at the same time at the end of flying. Let's take the RAF's 80th birthday celebrations along to the next stage. In this formation are the twin-engined Blenheim light bomber, 2 biplanes, the Hart light bomber and the Gladiator fighter, and the monoplane Harvard trainer, all dating from the 1930s. The Gloucester Gladiator biplane was a mid-1930s attempt to bring what was basically First World War aviation technology up to date. The North American Harvard entered RAF service in 1938. It was the Allies' most successful trainer of the Second War. And the elegant Hawker Hind bomber leading the Gladiator here. But even before the prototype Gladiator biplane had flown, the first 8-gun fighter, a monoplane, was already in flight testing. The Hurricane, in the lead here, first flew in 1935, and the Spitfire, the other 2 in this group, took to the air the following year. It was a good thing for the RAF and for Britain that both of these aeroplanes had arrived, because by July 1940, one of the most significant battles of the 20th century was underway, the Battle of Britain. At stake was Britain's survival, and by extension the survival of the free world against Nazi fascism. At the start of the battle, there were a bit more than 600 Hurricanes and Spitfires against about 2,600 German aircraft on the near continent. But by October, it had become clear to Hitler that he could not achieve air superiority over Britain, and he postponed his planned invasion, as it turned out, indefinitely. During the battle, the Luftwaffe lost more than 1,700 aircraft to the RAF's 900. These 2 were the aeroplane types that achieved that signal and unexpected victory. The Hurricane was virtually at the end of its development as a fighter by late 1940, although it did go on to do sterling work in the ground attack role. But the Spitfire became the only Allied fighter to remain in production throughout the Second World War. In 1936, the prototype could manage 340 miles an hour with a 1,000 horsepower engine. By 1945, the Mark 22 version was a third faster again, at 450 miles an hour, with an engine more than twice the size. More than 20,000 Spitfires were eventually delivered to the RAF, amongst them this Mark 19 unarmed reconnaissance version, which now belongs to Rolls-Royce. This aircraft flew about 9 operational photo reconnaissance sorties for 16 Squadron before the end of the war. By 1941, the Royal Air Force was recovering from the superhuman efforts of the Battle of Britain, and it was beginning to take the war to Germany. It was also starting to take delivery of the single most important weapon in that particular war, the 4-engined Avro Lancaster bomber. The Lancaster became the most successful night bomber of the whole war. It was once described by that grand old man of British aviation, Sir George Edwards, as an aircraft designed by engineers and built by craftsmen and women for heroes to fly. An indication of that heroism is that out of 7,377 Lancasters built, nearly half of them, 3,349, were lost on operations. The markings on this aeroplane are those of a Lancaster of No. 9 Squadron, which flew on more than 100 operations, including the first attack on the battleship Tirpitz. 9 Squadron's motto, appropriately, is Per Noctem Volamus, we fly through the night. And the black and white on the tail fins indicates the aircraft was a flight leader. Despite the markings, this aeroplane was actually built in 1945. She was about to depart for the Far Eastern War against the Japanese when the atom bombs brought that war to an end. So she never actually saw operational service. But she is now one of only 2 of all those thousands of Lancasters that are still flying. The other one's based in Canada. This one is now the flagship of the RAF's Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. And the 2 Spitfires and the Hurricane that we saw before also belong to the Memorial Flight. Back in 1928, an RAF cadet called Frank Whittle had written a thesis. He suggested how aircraft could fly at 500 miles an hour at a height of 50,000 feet. That was more than 3 times the speed and twice the height of contemporary fighters. 13 long years later, in 1941, the Whittle jet engine took to the air in the experimental Gloucester E-2839. By 1944, the first operational British jet fighters were arriving on 616 Squadron. And that was the only Allied squadron to fly jets during the war. Their Meteor F-1s had a particular operational role of destroying V-1 flying bombs. The Meteor was highly successful. More than 4,000 of them were built, and they served with 13 air arms around the world. The Meteor engines were Rolls-Royce Derwents, direct descendants of Whittle's original engine. In fact, in Germany, Pabst von Ohain had flown his jet engine in a Heinkel aircraft in 1937, and the Germans had far more jets flying during the war than the Allies. But after the war, it was the victors whose technology prevailed, and it's true to say that today's Pratt & Whitneys, General Electrics, and of course Rolls-Royces all trace their designs back to the work of that RAF cadet who became Air Commodore Sir Frank Whittle. So the next formation at the show represents the era in the RAF's history when British jets were among the best in the world. There is a Meteor here on the right of the picture. It's one of the later night fighter versions. Moving towards the centre of the picture, next is the Vampire. That was a contemporary of the Meteor, but it didn't make it into Air Force service before the war ended. It was the first Allied aircraft to exceed 500 miles an hour, though. Next to that, the Vampire's more powerful successor, the Venom, first flew in 1949. Next, the wonderful Hunter, more on that in a moment. Furthest away with the smoke, the Fallen Gnat. That's in the colours of the Red Arrow's predecessors, the Yellow Jacks. Next time they come past, they've reversed the formation, so the Hunter is second closest to the camera. Hunter was the most successful post-war British fighter dating from 1951. It was a world speed record holder in 1953 at 727 miles an hour. But before most of these jets came into service, the first moves of the Cold War had started, when the Russian leader, Stalin, cut all road, rail and canal links between West Germany and its capital city, Berlin. The Western Allies, Britain, the US and France, were left with 2 alternatives. They could let Stalin have Berlin, or they could supply it by air. And supplies meant everything: food, machinery, medical supplies, coal, petrol, oil. And Berlin's population of 2 million was the equivalent of 2 modern-day Birminghams. So another major theme of Royal IAT 98 celebrated the 50th anniversary of the greatest air supply operation the world has ever known, the year-long Berlin airlift. For this historical reenactment, Fairford's airfield became first RAF Wunstorf, one of the mounting bases for the airlift. No less than 7 DC-3s showed the stream takeoffs that in 1948 frequently went on 24 hours a day. But it wasn't just DC-3s, Dakotas as the RAF called them. There was also an elegant four-engine DC-4, no doubt looking rather more presentable than when they were carrying coal and oil into Gatow. And as well as that, well, some people will tell you that this is the most beautiful big piston-engined aircraft there's ever been, the Lockheed C-121 Constellation. I say C-121 because although Lockheed designed it as a civil airliner for long-range domestic routes within the US, this particular aircraft started flying with the Air Force's Military Air Transport Service, MATS, in 1948. She arrived in MATS just in time for the Berlin airlift, and she was immediately put to use flying supplies across the Atlantic and into bases like Wunstorf. So it was a particular pleasure to see her as part of Royal IAT's Berlin airlift celebration. The more so because there are only 5 Connies left flying in the world, and none of them is based in Europe. She has an interesting history. After Air Force service, she was used as an insecticide sprayer for Canadian forests. And then John Travolta bought her. He intended to refurbish her, never actually got round to it, but her present owner, Vern Rayburn, did. And just look at the results. Isn't she gorgeous? Which is not to detract from the elegance of the DC-4, the C-54 Skymaster in military terms. This one is used to remind people these days of what luxury travel was like in the 1940s and 50s. And indeed, during the run-up to the air show and afterwards, she was giving luxury charter rides to all and sundry. But her part in the Berlin airlift reenactment was to represent the great importance of the DC-4's contribution. Because although the twin-engine DC-3s were vital, they just weren't big enough. And it was only the advent of aircraft like the DC-4 and the British Yorks and Hastings that made the whole airlift fully practical.
This is the last DC-4 that was ever produced. It came off the production line in Santa Monica in California on the 4th of August 1947. It was delivered new to South African Airways then. South African Airways introduced it onto the Springbok service to London immediately, and it has served with South African Airways until 1965, when they were sold to the South African Air Force, where it served for another 25 years. And for the last 5 years it's been operating with the South African Airways historic flight again. This aeroplane is 100% stock standard as it was when we got it delivered, except for 3 different instruments and the Boeing 737 business class seats at the back. And it's used more or less exclusively for all-inclusive safari packages, similar to the Orient Express does, and the Blue Train in South Africa does. And we flew it from South Africa to Europe on a 15-day flying safari, taking in destinations such as Victoria Falls, Kilimanjaro, Zanzibar, Djibouti, Amman, Istanbul, Zurich, and on to Berlin, where we participated in the Berlin airlift celebrations. During the Berlin airlift, 52 of these aircraft formed the backbone and carried most of the necessities for the 2 million people that were stuck in Berlin, from mainly Wiesbaden Air Force Base and also Frankfurt Main. And the DC-3s flew more from the other Air Force bases in West Germany to Gatow Airport in Tegel, whereas the DC-4s and the C-54s flew mainly into Tempelhof Airport.
Although there are still a few DC-4s left flying, in addition to Flippy Vermeulen's elegant machine, none of the larger British types is still in airworthy condition. But here the archive pictures of the Avro York demonstrate that it too was present in large numbers. Back to the air show, and having started with the streamed takeoffs from Wunstorf, Fairford's airfield has now become Gatow in the centre of Berlin, and the stream of landing aircraft is going on at the same time intervals. The pattern was strictly regulated. There was no room for error. If an aircraft missed its approach, it had to fly back to where it came from. There was no way it was allowed to go round the pattern and try again. As one aircraft was turning off the runway, so the next one was on short finals to land. The whole thing became known as the String of Pearls, because that's what it looked like whether you saw it in the air or on a radar screen. Although some of these DC-3s are in their modern paint schemes, because yes, they're still in commercial use today, some have been repainted for the celebration. This is the standard RAF Transport Command colour scheme of the time. After landing, the long taxi pattern into the places where they're going to unload their precious supplies. But all the while, the landings continue. The airlift kept Berlin going for 11 months, until in May 1949 the Soviet Union lifted the blockade. But the airlift itself kept going until that September, and in that 15-month period, more than 2.25 million tons of supplies were brought into the beleaguered city, in more than 277,000 return flights. It was the biggest air supply operation there's ever been, but it worked thanks to the aircraft and to the pilots. When the aircraft eventually arrive at their parking spots, they're met by appropriately vintage vehicles for the unloading.
Well, the Berlin airlift started out like a cowboy operation. You know, it wasn't organized well, a lot of airplanes trying to get to Berlin and back in a hurry. But it was quite an operation. First time over Berlin, didn't know how 2 million people could live in that debris. It was total devastation. Met 30 kids at the fence at Tempelhof. Kids didn't have gum and candy, hadn't had for months, barely enough to eat. So I told them they'd come back the next day in an open place between the bombed out building and the barbed wire fence. When I flew over their head to land, I dropped enough for everybody to have a full stick of gum at least. And that's how it got started.
At the end of the historical reenactment, the Royal Air Force flew past a selection of aircraft to represent the RAF squadrons that had taken part in the airlift. First, Chinook and Puma helicopters, representing numbers 18, 27 and 230 squadrons. RAF aircraft flew more than 175,000 sorties out of a total of more than 555,000. Next, an RAF and a Canadian C-130 Hercules, representing 24, 30 and 47 squadrons, and also 429 Squadron of the Royal Canadian Air Force. During the whole airlift, the two biggest air forces, the United States and the Royal Air Force, clocked up more than 100 million miles between them, further than the distance between the Earth and the Sun. And in addition, in this flypast, there was a VC-10 and a Nimrod, representing numbers 201 and 206 squadrons. But the Hercules in those flypasts take us on to the way military transports operate nowadays, and it is true to say that the Hercules is the true successor to the brilliant and ubiquitous DC-3. This aircraft is from one of those Berlin airlift squadrons, number 57 Reserve Squadron at RAF Lynham, and this is the Hercules tactical demonstration. So, first of all, the aircraft, in the hands of Captain Flight Lieutenant Dom Stamp, lines up for a short tactical landing, one of the Hercules' many strong points. Dom Stamp plants it firmly on the runway. The four big Rolls-Royce Allison turboprops spool up in reverse pitch, slowing the aircraft dramatically. The ramp's coming down at the back. And there are the loadmaster crew waiting to get the smaller tow ramps down as soon as the aircraft has stopped. Which it does, helpfully turning itself away so that we can see what's going on. Tow ramps down. And out comes the Land Rover in a rush. There's room in there for 3 of those with trailers. Tow ramps stowed again, crew back on board. Now Dom Stamp backs the aircraft up the runway so as to make best use of the pretend short space available. In reality, here at Fairford, he's got nearly 2 miles of runway. But this is a demonstration of what can be achieved when circumstances demand. It's a matter of interest, when you're backing an aircraft like this, you don't put the brakes on to stop it, because it falls on its rear end if you do. No, you put the props back into forward pitch and rev up. which is handy anyway because the next thing you do is get airborne again, the aim being not to stay on the ground any longer than absolutely necessary. I make that 1 minute and 50 seconds on the ground. Not bad for getting a Land Rover and troops off. Every Royal International Air Tattoo has an operational theme. Skywatch 98 was all about the eyes and ears of the sky. The idea is to attract specialist aircraft and their crews from around the world. This, of course, is the world-famous U-2 spy plane, although the US Air Force prefers to call it a high-altitude standoff surveillance and reconnaissance aircraft. The 98 Skywatch turned out to be one of the most diverse meetings of airborne intelligence-gathering devices we've yet seen. The aircraft were all on display and the crews got stuck into a round of competitions and social gatherings. One of the things about Skywatch machines is that they all look a bit, well, odd, but their crews are proud of them. And the part of Skywatch that appeared in the flying display included various reconnaissance aircraft taking their reconnaissance pictures of the airfield and of the thousands of people watching the show. These pictures came from the Canberra PR9. Well, back to the U-2 that we saw earlier. It doesn't fly in the actual flying display, sad to say, because it all takes too much time getting it on and off the ground. But the spotters and enthusiasts who come for the park and view sessions before the show proper did get to see it land. It's really a big glider, this aircraft, with a single 17,000-pound thrust GE engine added. It's got a wingspan of about 103 feet. That's slightly bigger than a Boeing 737 airliner. But of course, that can carry 170 passengers. This one's a single-seater. It does have an amazing so-called glide ratio, about 22:1. That means that if it were overhead Fairford at its operating height of, say, 70,000 feet, and the engine quit, it could still land at Carlisle. Anyway, here it is landing at Fairford, and just like a glider, it's only got wheels along the centre line, so as it slows down, one wing tends to drop, which is what those trucks following it are supposed to prevent. It's all a bit Fred Carno, really, but I suppose that's par for the course for these strange, spooky aircraft. It was one of the early products of the Lockheed Skunk Works. And in case you're wondering about takeoff, well, it does have little wheels on stalks fixed to the wingtips, and they drop off as it leaves the ground. Well, here's another aircraft that looks strange enough to be a spy plane of some sort, but actually its link with Skywatch 98 is, well, a bit tenuous. It's in this bit of the show because there is an airborne early warning version of this, the Ukrainian Antonov AN-72. This one is just the straight transport aircraft, although evidently one with an impressive short takeoff performance. In the rather derogatory way that NATO used to give code names to Eastern Bloc aircraft during the Cold War, this one was known as Cola. Not as in Coca-Cola, but as in coal carrier. So we'll just refer to it more politely as the AN-72. It was beautifully demonstrated for us by Lieutenant Colonel Oleksiy Vanev of the Ukrainian Test and Research Center. In fact, his display was so good that he won the Lockheed Martin Canestra Trophy for the best demonstration by an overseas pilot. AN-72 first flew in 1977. It was Antonov's first jet transport. It was an interesting departure with those two big Lutarov D-36 turbofan engines mounted way up on top of the wings. But as we see when Colonel Oleksiy does this amazing steep turn, there's a good logic to that, because up there they're blowing their jet efflux right over the back half of the wing, which helps the lifting power of the wing. Because although we talk about lift as if it was a force pushing up from underneath, it's really much more a suction force on top of the wing. So if you make the air go even faster over the wing, you get more so-called lift. Clever stuff. Not specifically part of Skywatch, but a fascinating look now at an aircraft making its British debut. This may look like the Hercules we saw earlier doing its tactical stuff, or say any of the 2,200 Hercules that have been built at Lockheed's Marietta, Georgia plant. But this one is radically different. Perhaps the biggest external change with this, the C-130J model, is in the propellers. These new props are six-bladed, and they're made in Britain by Doughty Aerospace propellers. The engines that drive them are still Allison's, but they're much updated compared to the ones on the RAF's current K model, and Allison is now part of Rolls-Royce. So that means two big British companies, Doughty and Rolls-Royce, are heavily involved in the C-130J. And unusually for an American aircraft, the RAF has become the launch customer.
C-130J is a major advance over the current C-130s. We have converted the cockpit from a four-man crew to a two-man crew. Both the pilots now do the functions of the flight engineer and navigator. This is made possible through significant automation of cockpit controls, as well as a full-time head-up display for each pilot. Head-down display has been provided in a format that the pilot can select anything on these displays that he needs to fly the airplane. Many of the functions are now automatic, therefore does not require someone to monitor them. Therefore, we don't need extra crew members to do this job. The C-130J is a major infusion of current technology. Over the period of the last few years, many things have improved and a number of things have been available to the C-130. These have been incorporated in C-130J in a major update of the aircraft, primarily in the area of propulsion systems and avionics. Both the head-up display and the head-down displays are liquid crystal displays that are very readable in direct sunlight. They have very good acuity and make it much easier for the pilot to do such things as follow a moving map, see radar, do the things that he has to do in a tactical environment. The airplane has the capability of monitoring the health of all the systems in the aircraft. We have two mission computers that are basically the heart of the system. They continuously monitor the state of all the systems and advise the pilot if there's anything and any malfunctions that occurs. In addition to that, we have full-time, full authority digital fuel controls on our engines, which makes the engine control very precise, makes the pilot's job much easier and much simpler.
Well, the RAF today is of course the sum of its history in its 4/5 of a century so far. And although we've seen many of the RAF's historic aircraft, we've not got two very significant performers of recent years in the show. So as not to miss them altogether, let's just remind ourselves first of all of the awesome power of the 1950s English Electric Lightning. Heading skywards like a homesick angel, initial rate of climb 50,000 feet per minute. And when it gets up there, belting along at twice the speed of sound. Fantastic. And just a brief glimpse to follow of that other gas-guzzling, power-pulsing, thunder-throttling star of the 60s, 70s and 80s, the wonderful Mark 2.2 Phantom F4. But back up to date and the real frontline Air Force of today, starting with the ground attack aircraft, the diminutive Jaguar. Its wing is about the same size as the Tornado's tailplane, but it packs a real punch, as demonstrated in the Gulf War. Today we have a different sort of demonstration, the RAF's official 1998 Jaguar display, in the totally professional display hands of Flight Lieutenant Mark Cutmore, Cutty to his mates. Well, we're still with the ground attackers. This is Harrier, the magic jump jet that doesn't have to use airfields but can if it wants to. And this is how it does its vectored thrust short takeoff with just one extra lever in the cockpit for the pilot. That was actually the now superseded GR3 version. This is the current one, the Harrier GR7, flown by Flight Lieutenant Roly Sharman. So as the Harrier turns back towards us, slowing down, it's supported decreasingly by lift from the wings and increasingly by jet thrust from its vectored jet nozzles. You can see the huge flaps at the back of the wing and the big air dam under the fuselage that concentrates the effect of the vertical jet thrust near the ground. And this might look like the beginning of a courtly bow, but with the wheels down, it's actually the start of a demonstration of a short landing on the grass, something else most jets can't do. Mind you, it doesn't do the grass much good, so Roly Sharman actually makes it into a touch-and-go landing. This is another official RAF display for 1998. So that, as with the Jaguar, and as we shall see with the Tornado F3, this is the display you get at whatever air show you go to in 1998. So you're getting consistency. It does mean, though, that at a show like the Royal IAT, which sometimes wants to push the boundaries out and weave the participants into a wider entertainment canvas, you can't always do that with the RAF displays because no flexibility is allowed. This time, Flight Lieutenant Sharman is saluting his audience with that courtly bow. And once he's got the wheels up, he demonstrates another of Harrier's extraordinary party tricks, flying from a mountain valley floor and going straight up the steep side of the valley. And here's another aircraft from the recent RAF pass, which was a huge crowd. Sad to say, although there are one or two left which are still flyable in theory, no one's come up with the money to get them civil certification. So no Avro Vulcans are flying nowadays, and we have to content ourselves with archive pictures. Not pictures from its recent airshow displays, though. These date back to the 1950s, when the Vulcan was first in RAF service as a long-range strategic nuclear bomber, and then later when it carried the Blue Steel standoff missile. In those days, it was part of the so-called V-Force. And here's another member of the V-Force, the extraordinary-looking Handley Page Victor, at this time also a nuclear bomber. Victors remained in service until recently, but as air refueling tankers rather than bombers. The decade after the V-bombers came into service, Britain was developing a radical new low-level supersonic strike aircraft called TSR-2, standing for Tactical Strike and Reconnaissance. The operational requirement called for it to be able to fly supersonically at low level, and also to be able to operate from grass runways in the field. It had flown supersonically, and it was well into its operational testing at the Government Aeroplane and Armament Experimental Establishment at Boscombe Down, when a cost-cutting Labour government cancelled the whole project, so it never actually made it into RAF service. But back to the present and TSR-2's modern equivalent that certainly did make it into service, the Tornado.
The Tornado GL1 is a fighter bomber. It's designed now in modern warfare to attack targets with precision, low collateral damage. And to do that, we use the TIALD, which is thermal imaging, airborne laser designation, as a TV and infrared system, so we could find targets and fire a laser, which in turn guide laser-guided bombs to hit the target with precision.
To fly the Tornado, it's very easy to fly it physically, to pole the aircraft around, very similar to flying the Hawk. That's the easy part of it, really, but the difficult part is flying the aircraft operationally. I mean, for instance, later on in on a squadron, you'll be leading 4 aircraft around Britain, off to a range, simulating attacking targets in the UK, being attacked by another aircraft as well. And that gets very, very busy and very, very difficult. And also operationally, out in the Gulf, when we're flying out there, you know, designating targets inside Iraq, again, that concentrates the mind as well. That's one of the more difficult aspects of flying it, really.
Now we can see Tornado at the show. In this case, not the bomber, which those guys fly, but the fighter, the so-called air defence variant, in RAF terminology, the F3. 2 of them here, both from Leaming in Yorkshire. The first from number 11 brackets F close brackets squadron. They're very proud of that F at Leaming. It stands for fighter, and being a fighter squadron distinguishes them from mere mortals who fly some lesser kind of aircraft. And the second aircraft here is the one that's going to do the display. It's from 25, also F Squadron. This is the official display aircraft with display markings, those stripes on the forward fuselage and on the top of the fin. But have a look at the bottom of the fin, where it looks, well, dirty. It is. When the reverse thrust comes in to keep the landing short, that's where the jet gases go. So, display or not, fighter squadrons obviously have better things to do with their time than keep their aircraft clean. Naturally, this is also the display crew for the F3. Flight Lieutenant Pete Hackett is the pilot. His nickname is Willie. It's a very RAF joke, as in Willie Hackett, meaning can he do it? Well, I think that the immaculate display that he and his navigator, Flight Lieutenant John Shields, do is ample evidence that he can hack it. Wings of the Tornado fully forward at 25 degrees of sweep back here, but as they pull up and turn away, you can see the wings have changed to the mid position of about 45 degrees of sweep back. The F3 showing part of its armament system here. Those racks sticking out under the wings are for the short-range air-to-air missiles, and on the underside of the fuselage the recesses for the bigger medium-range missiles. At the moment those missiles are Sidewinder and Skyflash respectively. They're soon to be replaced by ASRAM, Advanced Short-Range Air-to-Air Missile, that stands for, and AMRAAM, the Advanced Medium-Range Ditto. Of course, no missiles in evidence here during a display, although I sometimes think it would be good to see the aircraft with a full weapons load, well, at least with dummies. See, the good thing about Willie's display is that there's always something happening right to the final manoeuvre, and you can just see the wings starting to sweep fully back to the 67-degree position as the F3 accelerates to 690 miles an hour, Mach 0.92, and then it pulls up into what they call a vertical departure with that fully swept dart-like look to the aircraft. And roll. Magic stuff from 25 F Squadron at RAF Leaming. We saw earlier some of the old friends and allies who came to help the RAF celebrate its birthday, but there's one particular nation which I've decided to class as a new friend, and that's the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. It's undoubtedly a friend, but in terms of the 80 years of the RAF's life, it's arguably new, because it became the constitutional monarchy that it is today as recently as 1946. Under the guidance of King Hussein, Jordan has become one of the Royal International Air Tattoo's staunchest supporters. So it is that the Royal Jordanian Falcons, in their 4 extra 300 aeroplanes, are amongst the most regular attenders, ranking with the likes of the Red Arrows and the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. Actually, we weren't sure whether we'd see them in 1998 because the year before, a fifth aircraft associated with the team, you'll notice there are 4 in the formation, anyway, a fifth aircraft crashed into the crowd at a Belgian air show. 7 spectators were killed and many injured. For a time, it was possible that the team would be disbanded. But here they are, and of course the Royal IAT's famous concern for safety helped ensure that the Falcons display was once again conducted with the absolute minimum of risk. It is perhaps worth pointing out that no spectator has been killed at a British air show since 1952. The Falcons are actually part of the Royal Jordanian Airlines, but the pilots are all Air Force officers. Team leader is Major Omar Huwage, and along with his director on the ground, Lieutenant Colonel Adel Shanag, he's the one who's responsible for this impressively close, rock-solid formation. As they climb in the vertical in a shape called swan, here's one of their photogenic breaks. But as well as new friends like the Jordanians, there are plenty of air arms which are at one time or another on the other side. It's one of the unique strengths of the Royal International Air Tattoo that it's always been able to attract participants from, say, the former Warsaw Pact nations, even in the days before the Soviet Union collapsed, taking the Pact down with it. But now countries like Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, Russia itself are all represented, and indeed they're made very welcome. Of course, all of those nations were allies during the Second World War, and it was only during the Cold War that we found ourselves on opposite sides. One nation with which the Royal Air Force has had a especially close relationship was Czechoslovakia. Indeed, it's a pilot on one of the RAF's Czechoslovakian squadrons who holds the record for the number of German aircraft downed during the Battle of Britain. So the now separate Czechs and Slovaks are doubly welcome at Air Tattoos and RAF celebrations. This graceful team of 7 Aero L-39 Albatros aircraft come from the Slovak Air Force Academy at Kozice. They are Biele Albatrosi, the White Albatrosses. Here's something very exotic. The number 4 aircraft of Captain Marek Miga rolls around the rest as the 2 wingmen, Major Luboš Novak and Major Peter Fianta, roll upside down. One of the long-time favourite display aircraft at the Royal IAT is the Russian-built MiG-29. There were 2 of them at the show, one from the Hungarian Air Force and this one from the Slovak Air Force. In fact, they were so good that they both won prizes. Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Hulek was the pilot of this A-model MiG-29, and his aerial virtuosity won him the Super Kings Trophy for the best solo jet demonstration at the show. Bear in mind, as you watch the unbelievable things that the good Colonel does with his aircraft, that this MiG-29 does not have the benefit of fly-by-wire controls, so all the skill is in the manual dexterity of the pilot.
the occasion on this anniversary of the Royal Air Force, what we are celebrating together, I would like to wish all Royal Air Force to spend this time, and especially for air crew, so much landing, as much takeoff.
Or you could say, as one pilot to another, may you have as many landings as you have takeoffs. But now, the RAF's current front line. Canberra, Tornado, Bomber and Fighter, Harrier, Jaguar and Hawk flying together in formation. Next, the salute to fallen comrades, the missing man formation found by 4 Tornadoes of number 11 Fighter Squadron. The aircraft on the leader's left pulls out of formation. The gap he leaves is the aching void left in our hearts when someone, father, husband, friend, brother, sweetheart, someone doesn't return from the battle. But as well as commemoration, how could we forget that this is a birthday party? It's the Big 8-0. That gigantic 8-0 in the sky was made up from 21 Tucano basic trainer aircraft, and the band of the RAF College and the Stephen Hill Singers led the birthday singing. Probably a record for the number of people involved in community singing, and the Guinness Book of Records has been approached to ratify it. But of course, for lots of people, the highlight of the show is the birthday display of the Royal Air Force aerobatic team, the Red Arrows. They arrive in a formation called Big Vixen. And if you're a Reds buff, you'll probably know that this is the first year they've started their show from stage left rather than from behind the audience. It was all to do with a very long argument over the years about whether the Reds could continue to be virtually the only people allowed to fly over the audience. Eventually they agreed, reluctantly, that they wouldn't. And the show is none the worse for that. Anyway, there they are in their trademark formation shape, the Diamond 9. This is the Card 9 shape, difficult to fly because line abreast formations are hard in swept-wing aircraft, but it's leading to this beautiful split. The group on our left calls itself Enid, after Enid Blyton's famous 5. And this one is called, rather more obscurely, Jippo. I'm told it relates to a First World War piece of troops slang, Jippo, which meant seconds. So here is Jippo, heading at something like 600 miles an hour closing speed, back towards Enid. And here is Enid, now in a sort of stepped-down Vic of 5, making a kind of tunnel for Red 9, Squadron Leader Gary Waterfall, to fly through in a manoeuvre the Reds call the Goose. I shan't try and explain that one. This gorgeous romantic heart is flown, perhaps surprisingly, by the 2 hard men of the team, the synchro pair, Flight Lieutenant Dave Stobie and Squadron Leader Andy Cubbin. New men at heart, of course. And the arrow through the middle is Red 8, Squadron Leader Andy Offer. Now here, 7 of the team are back together, that's all but 8 and 9, and they're in a shape called Vixen, nothing to do with foxes, but named after the naval twin-jet fighter called the Sea Vixen. And as they go over the top of their loop, well actually their quarter clover manoeuvre, watch for their graceful split. You might call it a downward bomb burst, or maybe even a parasol, but the official, rather prosaic name is the vertical split. Whatever, it's lovely. synchro pair now, 6 and 7, looking purposeful for the shotgun. And this is Jippo with the corkscrew. Here's Enid again with the double rollbacks. And see how the smoke changes colour just as each pair of aircraft pulls out of the formation, and the two that are left shuffle up to take their formation place next to the team leader, Squadron Leader Simon Mead. Isn't that just the most beautiful piece of aerial trail weaving? Well, we've taken the RAF from its beginnings in the First World War up to its 80-year-old present. Now, linking that present and the future, the Red Arrows leading in the frontline aircraft of the next century, the Eurofighter. First thing to notice about Eurofighter is that it's got the so-called canard wing ahead of the main wing. That gives it extra manoeuvrability. But the main thing that gives it agility is its fly-by-wire computers. In short, it's a highly agile combat aircraft that can destroy other aircraft either way beyond the horizon or in close quarters air combat, what we used to call dogfighting. As Eurofighter rolls away from us, there's a good view of some at least of its weaponry. Under one wing, a Sidewinder missile, shortly to become ASRAAM, the Advanced Short-Range Missile. And on the wing tips, the Defensive Aids Subsystem pods, we used to call them electronic countermeasures. And under the other wing, by the way, is a Flight Test Instrumentation pod. Eurofighter representing the future of the Royal Air Force on this 80th birthday occasion.